in Dallas, so I've been really excited and appreciative of them and working with them on the Viva la Fiesta exhibit downstairs. It opened in March, and we've been working on it together for about a year now. They have been gathering objects, and so it's been really fun working with you guys. They're both have deep roots in the community, and their family has been involved with the fiesta since its beginnings in the 50s. So that's really fun to have them, you know, working on this project. So I want to introduce them, and I'm not sure what they're going to do, but they have some musical instruments, so I'm excited about that. And without further ado, is Tony and Dallas Contreraz.
Well, thank you very much, and how do you know everybody? So I am Tony Contreraz. I'm one of the co-chairs, and most importantly, the older brother of Dallas Contreraz, who is my partner in crime and also co-chair of Fiesta. So just to start, just to let you guys know, so we're not professional speakers. This event has brought a lot out of us that, you know, it's pushed us beyond our comfort zone in certain ways. And, you know, so my intention is to make this as personal as possible. I know we're going to have some time at the end for some questions. You know, and our biggest goal throughout this entire thing is to, you know, educate people, of course, you know, in regards to, you know, the impact and the history of the Southside, specifically with the Mexican Fiesta and the kind of the Hispanic roots that we have here in town, and, you know, the amazing things that has brought to our area, but also a little bit more specific in regards to the Fiesta, which this summer in July 19th, we're going to be celebrating our 71st year. So we like to tout that we're one of the longest running cultural events in the area. You know, kind of pairing with kind of like the Oktoberfest, Herbstfest, and then maybe Crow Fair. Obviously, has been going on a minute. You know, so you know, we got a little ways to go before, you know, we're up to that level. But so yeah, so the Fiesta, the Viva la Fiesta display, which is what brought us to the Western Heritage Center, and, you know, formed fantastic relationships between me and Dallas and Lauren and Cecilia, was started last spring. Me and Dallas took over the co-chair spot of the Fiesta last year. And one of the things that Dallas pointed out early in the Fiesta is after 71 years, we were kind of at a crossroads and at risk for losing a lot of history, especially for as long as the Fiesta has been going. You know, we wanted to make sure that you know, we didn't lose any of that, and so we wanted to have a small display at the Fiesta, which happens down at South Park. I'm not sure if any of you have been to it, but we wanted to have a small booth that had some pictures, maybe a couple of articles, and so it's, you know, our journey started off with, okay, well, where can we go to start gathering information? Beyond the oral history that we had with our own family and the length of their involvement, you know, our intention at that point was like, you know, what's the one place that probably holds the key to the majority of the history of the area, and that is the Western Heritage Center. So we sent a couple of emails. We ended up, you know, getting in contact with Cecilia. And after a couple of weeks, you know, after our first meeting and going through some pictures, and then, you know, we continued to dig and dig and dig. You know, after, you know, a couple of months, where Dallas will do some more explaining there, we ended up with, you know, 400 plus pictures, and we ended up doing hours and hours and hours of oral histories with some of the people here in town, gathering history. And, you know, I can tell you that it was surprising the amount of history that we stood to lose, but I'm hoping that once we're done, if you haven't already had the opportunity to go downstairs and look at that display, you know, I encourage you to do so, and would be grateful if you did. But yeah, our intention today is to kind of, you know, we talked about the possible history gap that we were going to have, and just wanted to talk to you guys about the creation of the event, kind of from the beginnings to current. And, you know, our biggest goal kind of at this point, now that we are where we're at, is we're trying to remotivate community involvement. and, you know, make sure that we keep everybody excited for the fiesta. Last year was our 70th celebration, and it's kind of hard to gauge the amount of people that walk through an event at any given time, but just so you guys have an idea on scale of, before we talk about where we started at, we take up the majority of South Park. If you guys have been there before, it's a pretty big park. It's actually the first city park, municipal park in the city of Billings. We had somewhere, you know, I think 70 plus vendors. We had close to 20 food trucks. We were in the top 10 biggest car shows in the state last year. We had over 200 various cars in the Fiesta. We have a stage full of live music and dancing, and, you know, all sorts of various foods and kids games, and it's a pretty decent sized event. I think last year we're guesstimating about 3,000 people showed up to the Fiesta. So, you know, not a massive event, but it's pretty big, you know, and a very proud thing for the Southside. So the beginnings of the Fiesta started back in the 1950s. To take a step prior to that, how the Hispanic culture, you know, kind of made it into the areas is twofold. So in the agriculture world, and specifically in regards to the ranching, there were a lot of contracted and traveling, what they called vaqueros, which are Mexican cowboys that came and helped out in and around the area with cattle drives. That brought a lot of Hispanic roots to the community. The main thing were the migrant farm workers that came up to work the sugar beet fields for Western Sugar. And so that's how our family came up here, we're as migrant farm workers. And one of the beautiful things is, because it wasn't always the case throughout the history and throughout the country, but Billings was always pretty welcoming to the Hispanic community, going back into the 20s, which is when they kind of started traveling up here to work the sugar beet fields. So when the sugar beet factory was in process, the sugar beet factory built a colonia, which was kind of a community area for the migrant farm workers to, you know, stay at while they were up here. And it brought a lot of people. With the Mexicans that came up here, faith-wise, the majority of them were practicing Catholics. And so at that time, the Catholic church that was in Billings was St. Patrick's Co-Cathedral, just down the street over here off 31st. There was such a presence from the Hispanic culture and such a want to participate that the Catholic Church built their second Catholic church basically south of the tracks, and that was the original Our Lady of Guadalupe Church, which was originally built over by the colonia. So that structure does not exist anymore.
Can I throw a little fun fact in that?
Absolutely.
So the building that they were in, it was actually an old broom making factory. I thought that was kind of a neat thing that they converted. So
Yeah. So looking up at our slides, and I apologize, I'm not the best speaker in the world, but so the original Our Lady of Guadalupe Catholic Church was built in 1927. At that time, it ran a couple of years, and then the priest at that time asked for a name change. And then the Our Lady of Guadalupe Catholic Church became known as the Little Flower Church, and that was in the early 30s. And that church still exists now over off South 34th. And it has at one time had a school that was attached to it as well. But will you go to the next slide?
Yep.
Please? Okay. So in that time, coming into, so from the 30s to the 40s, there was a little bit of time where there was a little bit of pressure on the Mexicans at that time at the Catholic Church to where they weren't quite as welcomed, and so they were asked to sit in the back and sit upstairs in the balcony. And so from there, you know, the families that were around at that time didn't really like that their church had gotten renamed. They didn't like having to sit in the back of the church and sit upstairs. They wanted everybody to, you know, be able to just go and participate and have their faith. And so then at that time, that's where a group of families got together and petitioned the Diocese of Great Falls Billings for an additional church that had a little bit more of a Hispanic influence, where they were able to not only, you know, worship and have their faith, but then also share, you know, their faith and their heritage with the community. And so that was the incarnation of what became the Our Lady of Guadalupe Church, Part 2, over right across the street from South Park. So the diocese said yes, absolutely. The city of Billings said yes, absolutely. All we ask from you is we're going to need a little bit of help as far as operating costs, and then we need a location. So kind of a cool thing is where the Our Lady of Guadalupe Church, the structure is still there. It exists at going back again into the 19-teens into the 20s. That was actually a roller skating rink, the Roller-Rama, I believe.
Air Dome.
Okay. Oh, that's
Roller Air Dome, yeah.
And so the original roller skating rink that was there burnt down.
Yep, fire
And
damage.
then it was rebuilt as a roller skating rink, and then at some point just ended up going out of business. And then the Our Lady of Guadalupe, the parishioners, the Hispanic parishioners, ended up purchasing that building along with the Diocese of Great Falls, Billings. And then all the families are the ones who remodeled that church. They're the ones who did the actual elbow grease in regards to remodeling and building the church into what it looks like, what would it look like at that time. And it basically looks exactly the same. It's just got a different sign outside of it now. And then, so the next question became, okay, what do we do for operating costs? These are all, the majority of them are migrant farm workers. Now they're trying to set roots in Billings. A lot of them are definitely lower income. So they were like, okay, well, what do we have to give to the community where maybe we can do a little bit of fundraising? They're like, we can cook amazing food, we got some amazing music, and we all got big personalities, okay? And so they were like, let's have a fiesta. And so the first fiesta was in 1953, we'll have to come back.
Yeah, I'll come back.
So this is the very first Fiesta Council from 1953. And if you look at the names at the bottom, the Motas, the Mendozas, the Navas, Romeros, a lot of these families are still here in Billings. A lot of them still have active, members in the community. The gentleman in the back, right there that Dallas is pointing at, that's my grandpa, that's Tony Contreraz. So that's my dad's dad. And so these guys all got together and put together a festival basically that happened in an empty lot. The fiesta wasn't always at South Park. It started in an empty lot behind the church. That's the very first advertisement for the very first fiesta back in 1953. Basically they put together, not as we see it now. That's the first congregation for the Our Lady of Guadalupe Catholic Church. And you can see the windows are still boarded up. And this picture specifically is the First Communion, the first communion that happened for the Our Lady of Guadalupe Catholic Church. The empty lot that's right behind the church, there's currently the sandstone apartments are there now. But that's the lot that the first few fiestas were held at. And so we view a lot of the festivals now with pop-up canopies, and they're, in a lot of ways they're very commercialized. For years and years and years, the fiesta was done by local families, and it involved everybody from the grandparents down to the grandchildren. All of the booths were set up with tarps and 2x4s. It's like, we didn't have big, big stages and sound equipment and that kind of stuff, which I kind of miss because I feel like it made it a little bit more personal. If you wanted to hear the music, you had to come up to the people and, they actually got to play to you. And I think that's just such an amazing thing. Each family kind of had a dish that they made and, or a game that was played or a song that was played. There really wasn't a whole lot of organization other than they had music, they had food, and then they had entertainment. Past that, the beginnings of the fiesta started off with a procession that happened. This is actually, I'm going to turn around here. I know we typically don't like to turn our backs to the cameras, but I love this picture. So that's the oldest picture that we have from the first fiesta. That was in 1954. And how they used to start off the fiesta is they had a big procession that went in front of Our Lady of Guadalupe between there and South Park. And then there was a big speech that was made in regards to kind of like the Mexican independence. And it was a sharing for all of those individuals that didn't understand necessarily a lot about the Mexican culture. And then it was faith-based, obviously, because it was a fundraiser for the Catholic Church. And so it was opened with the procession, a speech that my grandpa gave, and then a prayer. After that, then there was just lots of music and dancing and, you know, lots and lots and lots of food. So a lot of the original entertainment that happened at the fiesta was family members. So we have a couple of pictures here. Tony Contreraz is a cousin of my dad. And just other, Amelia and Tony Ramirez. They all got together and they were like, man, what can we do? What performances and what do we have to share? All of their original costumes were all handmade. The majority of the music, it's like there were a lot of guitars and that type of stuff. It's like Jimmy, was a school-age kid, and they did their best to provide as much entertainment and as much bring as much celebration to the culture as they possibly could. And that fast forward into time. Will you hit the next screen for me? I'm just curious where we're at here. Basically started to transition into what became the more modern fiesta that we know. That transition happened kind of in the late 60s, early 70s. If any of you have ever been to the fiesta before, the footprint of what the fiesta looks like now is definitely driven from that transition. So, now we're at a point where we're getting ready to go from, brothers and sisters that were practicing in the backyard, nephews and nieces that were, practicing their singing at the kitchen table and, going out and performing in front of these groups, to the creation of more organized groups with the Los Guadalupanos dance group, some of the other musical entertainment that my brother will be talking about here in just a minute. And that's when the fiesta moved over to the South Park. Anything else from there that you want to throw in? I've been watching the clock. My 20 minutes is up.
Yeah, I can take it over from there. So as Tony said, the 70s was a big point of when the fiesta kind of moved into that next phase, right? So what was really neat, like Tony alluded to, is now we're kind of hitting the beginning of that second generation that grew up with it. They watched it. They got to see, how much their parents had passion into it, how much, that their older siblings got to do it, and now you have families that are big enough to have their own dance groups, right? And what's crazy about the dance groups, which is always such a big attraction, and even now I think that's my favorite part of the fiesta, it really, in Billings, these two people were pivotal. So that is Frank and Mary Astorga, and they were both from Mexico, but when they moved up here, they realized, the culture was starting to fade away, right? And she was a big dancer and it was in her heart, and she was in a dance group down in Mexico, and she wanted to bring that to Billings. So she worked with the public schools and was able to start teaching, all these young Hispanic kids, their culture, right? Which they were the ones that helped get my grandma into it, right? When they created Los Guadalupanos. And, a couple of the kids came home saying, hey, we had this lady at school come in and talk about about this Mexican dancing, we've seen it, but can we try to do something of our own, and so with the help of my Uncle Henry and my Grandma Ruth, they were able to, kind of form together the beginnings of what then became Los Guadalupanos. But what's cool though is throughout this project is we realized, obviously this is bigger than just our family, this is a community thing, right? And there was other dance groups in the area at that time too, so it was really thriving in the 70s. So the very first one that we could come up with was this Folklorico Hispano, and that was a group that was driven by Frank and Mary Astorga. From there, there was a couple groups that kind of, they began to dance together, realized they probably were better dancing apart just because of the number of people, and personalities get involved as well. So kind of in the 70s, the two primary groups was Los Guadalupanos and Los Amigos. Well, Los Amigos kind of disappeared off my research kind of in the late 70s, early 80s, and then a secondary group came out, which was called Los Little Latinos. Los Guadalupanos is the last remaining of these four, and there's been many other groups that have, popped up and came out, but these were kind of the four primary to kind of hold down the fort. What's so neat about the dancing tradition is it's super traditional, right? It's generational. This is just a good example of Los Guadalupanos here. So this is essentially, you're seeing almost 4 generations of dancers right here. So the first generation, this would have included, pretty much my dad and his 10 siblings, right? They were all dancing with each other in various skill levels, and that's what the cool thing about how well they were able to come up with those choreographs. They were able to kind of get everybody involved, and they did their best not to turn anybody away. It always just came down to how many costumes they had available, right? And so this is my Aunt Becky and my dad, and they're dancing what's called La Raspa. And then their younger siblings, they would have kind of came onto the scene as soon as they were coming off, right? And so this is Greg Contreras and Angelica. And what's cool is they are actually the current leaders of Los Guadalupanos. And this right here, you might recognize that young man, it's him right there. And my cousin Vanessa. And now we're down to Greg Jr., and Taylor, which is also a daughter of Greg up here. And what's crazy is these guys are probably on the verge of being that next succession of leadership, right? And so it's cool to think that, I'm gonna go back a slide, just from the want of somebody right here to, push on that culture and, push us forward as far as trying to keep, our roots alive, spawned all this, right? It's very impactful for me. And I love to share that information. The other part of the fiesta has always been a big piece is the music legacy, right? Man, I'm kind of getting emotional just thinking about it. So what's so cool about the music in Billings, right, is it spawned from just a few individuals, and it just grew from there, right? And so this was the very first Mexican band in Billings right here. They were called Los Crudos, which is a great translation, which means the hangovers. And these 4 gentlemen, there's Pasco Hernandez that's in the back here, Harold Garza and Roddy Garza, and then Joe Morin right there, And what's crazy is any succession of a Mexican band in town usually had roots tied in with those guys, right? One of my favorite little side stories is Joe Morin. He actually played with Chan Romero when he was a kid. They had a band together in town that was called the Belltones. And then, another prominent figure in Billings as far as Mexican music is concerned is Pete Rodriguez. I think everybody, if you've been in Billings long enough, have had an opportunity to listen to him. He was one of the big factors. I don't know if you guys remember the old Dos Machos days of them having a mariachi in there. He was the main ringleader of that. And then over here we got Little Joey Los Alegres, which is this young man here grew up to be this, right? So in the early 70s, they wanted to kind of put together a group, and there was a gentleman by the name of Les Archuleta who moved up here from Sterling, Colorado, and he was the other saxophone player here. And they were 2 aspiring young saxophone players, and at the time, there was a gentleman, he was working and met Les, and they got to talking, and he was asking what the music scene was like in Billings as far as Mexican music, and basically it boiled down to, it's like, well, there's really not a lot going on right now, but I know a guy, right? And that's a dangerous sentence, I know we all know that. But so, Les got introduced to Little Joe, and Little Joe, they kind of hit it off right away. They started playing music together, and it's like, man, maybe we should make this a thing, right? And so they invited a guitar player, Victor Ibarra. And same thing, that was going well. And then they're like, well, do we know anybody that plays the drums? And then that folded into bringing in, Johnny Mota, which he was a big prominent fixture as far as the Our Lady of Guadalupe choir, And so what then turned into kind of a garage band. It was like, well, now we need to play somewhere. Where can we play? And obviously the Fiesta ended up being one of those logical choices for them, which then they were a mainstay and a fixture for the Fiesta for over 30 years. Their group went on then to, play in and around the area. Like I know they played at the Malmstrom Air Force Base quite a few times. They played pretty much any quinceañera, any Mexican dance in town. They were usually involved, and went into Wyoming quite a bit, and I know they even played in Colorado a couple times. So they definitely became a regional talent. This was the last time all these gentlemen were together, and this was in 2008. And unfortunately, 3 of them have passed away at this point. We're still blessed to have, Bill Contreraz, and Johnny Mota still in town. There's been other various groups in town that have popped up as well. You know, this is one of my favorites. These guys are still in town right now, Mariachi del Corazon. And this is Rico Garza, which is his son. You know, and so it's like, it's just cool to see, like, it is such a tradition-based heritage that we have, you know. And then this is Pasco Hernandez, who was the drummer back here for that group. So, like, you know, it's just this, if you were to take a yarn line and put it all together, it's like, it's crazy how many times paths have crossed. You know, and honestly, like, Tony and I are both musicians as well. We might not be very good. You're gonna hear in a minute, you can decide. But, you know, it's one of those where it's just like, yet again, it's like, I get so much passion from learning these stories because it's like, it kind of helps complete who I think me is, right? You know, this is where my family came from. This is where it derived. If you add the, if you take 1 + 1, you know, equals 2, it's like, I think I figured out what that second numeral was, right, to make me. So there's lots of heroes within the Fiesta, but as we went through this process, you know, we were starting to uncover, there's a lot of names that started getting brought back up, right? You know, there's quite a few individuals that, you know, these were the linchpins of what made the Fiesta the Fiesta. You know, the biggest one, it sounded like in the 70s, Jose Chavez was the big driver, and I guess he had a very dynamic personality to push the Fiesta out forward, right? You know, it was always kind of a local community event on the south side, right? You know, he was the one that's like, we need to be sharing this farther. We need to get our reach farther out there. You know, and he had the skills and personality, you know, to present this to the community. And the Fiesta in the early part of times, it was never really a consistent weekend. It usually bounced based off weather, from Cinco de Mayo or to Mexican Independence Day, which is September 16th. You know, the next big prominent individual I'd like to point out is Bill Contreraz. So he's our uncle, but he's been involved with the Fiesta since he was a kid. So I'm gonna go back quite a few slides here real quick. And this was planned. All right, so if you look, there's a young little Nino over here wearing a little cowboy hat. That's my Uncle Bill right there. You know, so like, he's literally been part of the Fiesta since he was a wee little guy, you know, and you know, he always had the heart for it. And you know, I would say approximately, so after Jose Chavez left leadership of the Fiesta, he was the next one to take it on. And that happened kind of in the mid to late 80s. So, you know, but since then, he has been the guy that has been at the helm of running the Fiesta. You know, there's been a couple years where other people have helped him from a chair level perspective, but without these two gentlemen, you know, the Fiesta wouldn't be here today. Another big component of the Mexican Fiesta is the Bargers. So these guys are husband and wife. And they were the ones that originally started the Fiesta car show. So that was back in 1996. You know, they had an idea. Eddie himself was a big car guy, as you can see, and he did all the car racing. He did, you know, the derbies, pretty much anything in town. He was definitely involved with the car scene. And, you know, they were looking at a way like, how can we represent our faith and how can we represent and help the Fiesta out? You know, and they followed their passions, right? So it's like, okay, you know, let's do a car show. You know, what started as a modest car show, you know, their very first year, they only had about 25 cars. You know, here we are 25 years later, you know, we had over 220 cars last year. So, you know, without the brainchild of these two individuals, you know, that's one of the biggest draws to the Fiesta now is that car show. You know, food has always been a huge aspect of the Fiesta, right? You know, so a couple people we have to point out with that is going to be Esther Rivera and Josie Kornberg. So Josie is the one that used to own Torres Cafe. You know, so, and her parents as well were also involved with the beginning Fiestas as well. So, you know, yet again, we're just getting back to that similarities of that passing on of tradition, passing on of that torch. You know, Johnny Mota and Joe Morin, you know, from the music perspective, they held the fort down for the Fiesta for so many years, and they've helped inspire so many of us to continue on that tradition. And then lastly, Mary Alvarez, you know, her family, she grew up in Level and Powell, kind of down in that area, but every year their family would come up to help with the Fiesta. You know, she's had a booth within the Fiesta for, you know, probably 30, 40 years easily, and now, she's making sure her kids are, doing the brunt of that work, and, she holds them accountable. They're voluntold. It's great. So that kind of brings us to what the Fiesta is now. So this year we have our 71st year coming up. So we advertise the Fiesta in 3 different phases, right? So there's so much information, it's hard to get it all on one poster. So, we have the main Mexican Fiesta, which takes place at South Park, right? That's gonna be your kids' games, that's gonna be your food options, that's gonna be, the entertainment that's there, the car show, right? And then rolling into the evening, we have the Fiesta Dance. Which is just kind of a continuation of that celebration, right? It's a good way to put a nightcap on it. It's a good way to put the exclamation point into that process, right? And then obviously the car show involved with that. So we always advertise the Fiesta in 3 phases, right? So if you guys can help us pass along the word when people are questioning, is that the same Fiesta? Yes. We like to catch people's eyes in 3 different varieties. So that's why we've always kind of chose to do 3 different posters instead of a uniform look across. This year's Fiesta is going to kind of feature a couple new things. So we want to take the grandeur and all the things that were created in the past, and it's like, okay, what's Tony and I spin, with taking over the Fiesta? What can we do that adds something new to the process or adds a new unique experience, right? So, unfortunately, we don't have a local Mexican band anymore in town. If you guys have friends, make sure they're, passing the word on that we need to get something started in town. So we have a couple groups that come up from Idaho. One is Tejano Outlaw, and this year, in addition, we're bringing up another group that's called Nueva Generación, which is kind of unique, because I don't know if you guys are familiar with Tejano music, but Tejano music is kind of northern Mexico, southern Texas, is kind of the flair of that music, so it's very accordion driven. Like Selena, she was kind of a Tejano style artist as well, so that's usually, she's always referred to as the Queen of Tejano. And then this new group that we're bringing up, Nueva, they're more of a banda style, so that's going to be more central Mexico. So, trying to add in more unique flavors and, senses of what Mexico has to offer, right? We also are going to have John Roberts y Pan Blanco there too, so, we're going to kind of hit even just a little bit more of that Cuban, Puerto Rico, that style of music into the aspect as well. The other thing we're looking at doing too is expanding our vendors. It's like our reach for vendors. It's like, why can't it be more regional? Why can't it, be an opportunity to let, someone else, from a different area come up here and show what they have to offer, right? So now we kind of look into the future goals of the Fiesta. So the other big thing that we just got confirmed, so I should have updated this 20 minutes ago, but is we wanted to have a shuttle parking lot for the Fiesta. And so Tony and I's brainchild on that was like, okay, who has a big parking lot in the area that potentially can help us solve the solution? So between the two of us, we were kind of able to narrow down that, hey, Riverstone might be a good option, right? So, we had lots of conversations with them. It's like, okay, obviously there's lots of insurance conversations involved with that, and, who are we going to get to transport, and when you have a good idea and everything falls into place, it's just meant to be, right? Why force something that doesn't need to be forced? And, we've always had that mentality as we're running the Fiesta, and I'll tell you what, this landed into place. Like, we talked to Riverstone, and they were all about it. They thought it was a great option. Especially around South Park, it's all residential parking, so, it's kind of hit or miss on how much availability there is for parking. And last year we did our best to try to block off a certain section for handicap parking, and that got filled up, within minutes. And, we were blessed enough to have people stay long enough to where those spots really didn't turn over a whole lot. And so as we were kind of digging into that process of shuttle parking, like I said, Riverstone jumped right on it. They were so willing to host it, and then Tony and I started brainstorming options as far as like who can do the transportation, right? And, we kind of batted around like, oh, well, maybe we could use the church van, or maybe, maybe we could talk to the city and see if the Met Service would be willing to do that. And sure enough, someone brought up Sarpy Transportation, and same thing, that just fell right into place. They were all about it. They thought that was going to be a fun thing. So that kind of solved that solution already. So we're a little ahead of schedule, so don't tell anybody. We can start working on some other things. So the other thing is building a future endowment fund. So how the Fiesta has always worked is we fundraise year to year to prep for that year, right? So, Tony and I are both forward thinking of like, we want this to last longer than us. I tell everybody I'm going to year 100 and then I'm done. I just want to be able to enjoy it after that, it's like, man, how come we can't, work towards building that endowment and then know that the Fiesta will always have the funding that it needs, and can just work off the interest every year to be able to pay for this event. Inviting regional vendors to participate. I kind of touched on that a little bit earlier. Why aren't we able to get people from Denver to come up here? Why aren't we not able to get people from Salt Lake or Boise, who do have maybe a little larger Hispanic community that can help us with this event? We want to develop leadership success and planning, right? Tony and I were always involved with the Fiesta in some sort of capacity. We were either volunteers, we were participants, we were musicians, we were dancers, right? So we've been involved with the Fiesta in every level of capacity, and even just in our involvement within Fiesta leadership. Tony took care of the kids' games for a super long time. I took care of the stage work, and finally it was like, man, someone's got to take this over, it's going to go away, and we put that weight on us, and and it's like we want to help somebody else take that over, and the earlier I think we start that process, the stronger that we can get them unfolded in that process. I'm already planning my future retirement here. And then from there, we want to fundraise to secure bigger headlining acts. We're bringing in a couple bands from Boise, and it's like, man, what can we do to get it to that next layer? Like, so almost the idea of having that promoter mentality, and the only people that'll benefit is the city of Billings, right? And then we're also exploring maybe doing multiple events a year, right? We got more than enough, especially now in Billings, it's easier than it's ever been to find Hispanic options. Like, we have the most Mexican restaurants I can say we've ever had, and we have 2 Mexican grocery stores now in town. And so it's like the want is there and the clientele is there, right? And just being able to show off our culture, and our heritage to the community, in any way that we can do that, we're all for. And then this is the coolest part right here. We want to continue to gather Fiesta history. So we're working on volume 2 of our documentary, The Fiesta. So if you guys haven't seen it downstairs, we have volume 1, which talks more about the origin of the Fiesta. And this year we're working on kind of the history surrounding the dance groups. And thirdly, we'll probably end up being the music, but then after that, like, our future goal is, like, a lot of this is from the perspective of the Contreraz family, but there were so many more families that have been involved and that are involved. It's like we want to start taking the deep dive into their families, and how their families were impacted by the Fiesta, how the Southside, and just like, we're going to cast a bigger net, I guess, overall is kind of the goal, and to be able to kind of collect that information, to where, maybe if the Western Heritage Center is nice, they might let us have a second exhibition down the line, right? Tony was talking about how he collected over 400 pictures, and to be honest, I bet we're probably only displaying 60 of them, So there's so much more history, that's sitting out there and that we're trying to obtain. So if you guys are going through your photos someday and you find that you have a couple pictures of you or your grandkids at a Fiesta in the past, submit them to us. We have a giant sign, it's like a 15-foot screen, so almost double what this is, that is just flashing pictures at the Fiesta. It's one of those where I think that was probably the biggest saving grace for Tony and I last year, is that helped remotivate a ton of individuals as far as getting their passion back into the Fiesta. We talk about all the time, like, what's been our favorite part of this process of digging into this? And for me, it's like, I love seeing the joy on people's faces of when they see that picture and be like, wait, that's my grandma. Like, I didn't know she was involved with the Fiesta. Or, like, oh, that's Susie right there. Like, that is just, that's what gets me going. So at that point, real quick, before we hit questions, I think now's the time, right, Tony?
Well, so
do you have something else to say?
So I'll say, the best part about being the older brother is I can, say I'm going to throw something in real quick, which is super scary for everybody. Okay. One last thing that I did want to talk about, specifically in regards to just the amazing area that we come from. And when I say area, I'm talking kind of regionally and then focused in local. So me and Dallas, if you guys would indulge us, we'd like to play a song for you that we do for the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe every year at Little Flower Church now. That was started by our grandpa, some time ago. But one thing I did want to add to that is, we talk a lot about the sharing of cultures and the rubbing of elbows of cultures. And one thing that, it's like the Hispanic culture gets a lot of credit in regards to the working of the beet fields throughout the year, or, throughout the years. The original beet workers of the area, though, when I think it was before it was Western Sugar, but back in like 1901, 1902, it was a whole bunch of Russian and German immigrants that were originally working the beet fields. So during that transition, and that was a regional thing at that time because it wasn't just local farms. I mean, this reaches down into Wyoming and such as well. There was a big crossover of musical influence. And so there's a lot of local Hispanic music where it's very polka-based music that a lot of people don't know that, like, you hear it now and you hear that with a saxophone and an accordion and you're like, okay, that's Mexican, that's Little Joe Los Alegres up there playing, like it's a very unique sound. But a lot of the origins of that music came from the Germans and from the Russian farm workers that were working and teaching the Mexican farm workers. And what I love so much about that, then again, more close to home, is we have, like, over in Laurel, it was real prominent in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but you have the Herbst Fest, right? Which was a big celebration of, kind of that German culture and the German roots, over on that end of the area. There was one year, though, and it's funny, this doesn't even come from my family, this comes from my wife's family, who are German folks from Laurel. But they said that there was one year that they, for some reason, the band fell through for the Herbst Fest. And they were like, man, where are we going to get a polka band on such short notice? And that gentleman that was in the middle of the screen kind of doing, kind of this kind of thing, maybe Dallas can zap back to it real quick. Pete Rodriguez, oh, it just went away. So, only in Montana can you have an Herbst Fest celebrating the German culture with Pete Rodriguez wearing a sombrero, playing polka music. Like, that to me is the beauty of true diversity. Like, that's an amazing thing that is so unique to just our area. Those are the stories we don't want to lose. Those are the things that, like Dallas said, those are what make me, me. Those are the stories that make us and set us apart from the rest of everywhere. And that's why we're so passionate and not wanting to lose that. So before we play our music, I just want to say a great thank you to you guys for coming and for everybody that's watching online. A big thank you to the Western Heritage Center. Not that there weren't so many hands that helped us. I have to always, just really give a special thank you to Cecilia. I mean, we had lots of help from Lauren and just everybody that helps us here at the Western Heritage Center. But over the last year of getting to meet Cecilia and getting to work with her, and then you'll see her display work downstairs if you haven't already. Truly, she is a remarkable talent, and I think Billings is very lucky to have her. I hope she doesn't plan on going anywhere anytime soon. It's like this is no longer a working relationship. This isn't, just a place for us to display our culture or our heritage. This undoubtedly has become a friendship. And again, that's just the next step in the history of what makes us us. So thank you very much. And unless you got anything else.
Always waiting on the older brother.
Usually when we play music, me and my brother have a band here in town called Tanglewood, which does a variety of music. It's usually at a bar, and so there's alcohol involved. So if this doesn't sound good, I apologize. But my brother wanted to make sure we got everything right, so he even had me tape the words to my guitar, so I didn't mess it up. So.
Not only that, but I gave him a second copy, and he was supposed to give it to me, and look how it looks.
mexicano, por ser de tus santos, tus canciones te cantamos. Otra vez vengo de nuevo, como el agua en otros años, postrarme en tu altar. Soy tu pueblo mexicano, que en solo pensamiento se suplico arrodillado. Que intercedes por nosotros y por todos los amantes de la paz. Virgencita mexicana, hoy parte de tus santos, de quien quieren ver cantando. Interna las mañanitas como símbolo de vida, como símbolo de paz. Todo el pueblo mexicano cantarán alabanzas por tus celos de milagros. Aquí traigo mi ofrenda, mi guitarra, mis canciones, todos llenos de colores, como mi bandera nacional. Virgencita mexicana, Virgencita guadalupana, aquí traigo mi cantar. Soy tu pueblo mexicano, que en solo pensamiento te suplico arrodillado. Que intercedes por nosotros y por todos los amantes de la paz. Virgencita mexicana, hoy parte de tus santos, de quien quieren ver cantando. Interna las mañanitas como símbolo de vida, como símbolo de paz. Todo el pueblo mexicano cantarán alabanzas por tus cielos de milagros. Aquí traigo yo mi ofrenda, mi guitarra, mis canciones, todos llenos de colores, como mi bandera nacional.
I think without any further ado, it's not official till we're there. Any questions? Yeah.
You mentioned somebody that didn't know being involved in cars and so forth. I know John and Jesse know that. Jesse was quite a car.
Yes, you're right. So actually, it's funny you say that because Karen, the board director, I can't remember what his first name is.
Conrad.
Yeah. And he was saying the same thing. That he used to race back in the day with Jesse, and yeah, you're exactly right. So, I know he definitely had an influence with that as well.
Influence on the car scene, were there a lot of Mexican?
Personally, I don't know. I think that's another great area that we could delve into. But I know there's a few gentlemen in town, especially on that side of the community. Like Jake Romero, I know has a pretty killer car. Obviously Eddie, and Jesse, and so I imagine there was definitely a big piece of that. But that's just not something we've touched with yet.
Right. Well, and like in addition to that, it's like we have Eddie and Maggie Berger, and a few other slews of individuals. But it's like, and I can't remember exactly when, but Eddie unfortunately ended up passing away from cancer. And then when that happened, Maggie kind of stepped away from things. And so the Fiesta was actually without a car show for a few years. But then you have families like Jay and Char Krug from south of Laurel. The Krugs are a prominent family from south of Laurel. And then they're the one who kind of brought a resurgence back to the car show. You guys are welcome to come in. It's like you have, the Krugs, and we have a group of individuals now that Jay and Char have kind of stepped away, have retired, as they say, and they still have a hand, right? Like, they're always a helping hand for advice and, for any direction that we need. We have another unspoken group of individuals. They don't like it when we mention their names, so out of respect, we don't. But another, prominent group of individuals in town now that, help Dallas with the Fiesta. And again, it's one of those where it's, more local families. It's nobody from out of state. It's all local people that work here in town, that are still the lifeblood of the Fiesta car show as it exists today.
Are you aware of any link or any influence with Red Lodge's Festival of Nations, which started in 1951?
That's a great question. So we actually just learned about this working on our second volume of our documentary. So yes, so there was definitely a lot coinciding happening there. So a lot of the same individuals that were performing at the Fiesta were also invited to perform at the Festival of Nations. So like my Uncle Greg, let me go back here a few slides. He always talked about one of the highlights of his year was for when his family would go up to Red Lodge and dance. He said, because they didn't take a whole lot of family trips with the family of 10, not a whole lot of money involved, and so that was something they remember as kids, back in the early 70s, late 60s, of dancing at the Festival of Nations. Like, I know quite a few, in the early part of the Festival of Nations, it would have been similar to what it was like with the Fiesta. It would have been just those families that had the opportunity or had the ability to showcase. They were all about that. I know you've danced at the Festival of Nations a couple times growing up, right? So yes, there's definitely some commingling happening there as far as trying to, share that history through the Festival of Nations as well.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Although next month they're doing a museum in Red Lodge is sponsoring a tribute to the Festival of Nations.
I saw that in the paper.
Yep, and I'm planning. I want to see what they have that picture-wise. That I gotta add.
Thank you for reminding us. Perfect. Yes.
Any other questions?
I actually have one. Seeing your future plans, have you connected with Visit Billings to the Chamber at all about highlighting and getting aid from them? Because I see the potential for this to become like a statewide, like the Hispanic Fiesta for the entire state of Montana.
We're on the same vision. I like this. And that's some of the things Tony and I are still kind of exploring where our next steps are, and that's one of the biggest reasons we love networking like this, because it's like, it's not what you know, it's who you know, and, luckily we might know somebody now. So, if you know somebody within that circle, you might have to let us know. Yeah. Anything else?
If I could just add real quick, for the group, many of the things that you saw on the slides are actually on display downstairs. So the slide before this, I think it's the slide, the little Viva vest, that's on display downstairs. The saxophone is on display downstairs. A lot of the costuming that you see. So I encourage you, if you haven't seen it, check it out downstairs, because you now have a much deeper understanding of what those objects are and why they're important.
One of my favorite traditions at the Fiesta, real quick before we get there too, if you guys end up going downstairs, there's these little eggs, and they're called cascarones. And
I asked him if I could get him with one, and he told me no.
I already got a delicate head here. I don't want to do any more damage that's already been done. If you see this scar up here, it was from Tony anyways, and that's a whole other story we can get into. But those little eggs, cause so much joy and pain in one day, right? And there's a couple of them downstairs, so make sure you guys take a look at those if you get the chance. They're just a lot of fun. Traditionally they were brought around Easter time, and they're filled with confetti. And the goal and purpose is to try to torment your friends as much as possible.
So I was going to say, just to add to that, one of the reasons why the cascarones are so great
is watching people like Dallas that give all these kids in the park a hard time, and then I watch him become a target every year. And so what happens is we have chicken eggs, and the Marquez family is typically who does them now, but they get full of confetti, and then you put some tissue paper over them, and the eggs get dyed, and they get made real fancy, basically. And what you're supposed to do is right before you like hit somebody with it or smack them with it, you're supposed to just kind of break it in your hand just a little bit. But you see that devilish smile in people's eyes from time to time, and they remember what you did before. Doesn't remember when before was or what it was, but they remember what you did. And so, you know, if I could have a little Advil booth at the Fiesta, I think I'd make a killing. But that's another great, the reason I took the mic from Dallas on that, that's another great cross-cultural thing though. The cascaronas was a way, that actually came from Asia. And they used the chicken eggs as a way to transport spices and, you know, various things. So just another great little tidbit of knowledge that I didn't know prior, you know, to, you know, having a hand in researching for the Fiestas. I just knew we always did it, and I didn't have Dallas. Well, I did go after Dallas too because he's my little brother, but he would always cry to my mom, so he was kind of off limits. But I always, that was the one time a year I could go after my dad, and you know, he didn't. You know, we were in public, so you know, didn't beat me that bad. So again, so many crossing hands of culture, you know, that cross paths right here in Billings, Montana, and it's one of the many areas, one of the many things that we have that makes us, you know, so unique and so special.
And gosh darn it, we still got 3 minutes, so we're gonna use our time. So this is something, another older brother thing. You forgot this slide, right? I didn't. I knew all along. My dome is so big, you know, that's why my hair's not growing, you know. It was competing for the same energy source. So, so this right here, Mary Queen of Peace. So at the tail end of when Our Lady of Guadalupe, what ended up happening is in the early 2000s, they decided to merge 3 Catholic parishes together. They were all within a half mile of each other on the south side over there, which ended up being Holy Rosary, Little Flower, and Our Lady of Guadalupe. Just, you know, cost-wise, effectiveness, it just made sense to consolidate all 3 parishes. And they now congregate within Little Flower Parish, right? You know, and they go by the new name, Mary Queen of Peace Parish. So one of the other really neat things that I like about the Fiesta, and another aspect of why I'm so passionate, is those individuals here, you know, they were looking for a parish home of their own, right? You know, they collectively worked together as a small nucleus to create, you know, Our Lady of Guadalupe. So here we are, 70 years, trying to do the same thing. You know, we're trying to create our own new home as Mary Queen of Peace that's unified and all together. And if you guys get the opportunity on South 27th, you can already see where the new parish is earmarked. It's over by Sandy's, basically right across the way there. They have a statue of the Virgin Mary out there, and the ground is blessed. And we're getting very, very close to finish this project to actually start groundbreaking. So that was just one other parallel that I just wanted to throw out there for you guys as well, just so you were aware of, and you know, it's coming. It's in the works. Well, thank you guys so much. Anybody else want to say anything? All right, Tony, you can finish it off. We got 30 seconds.
Real quick, as one last thing, and I know obviously you guys are here because we have a big support for the Western Heritage Center, but if you would join me in a round of applause for their amazing staff and just an amazing facility. We've gotten to meet a lot of their volunteers throughout throughout this last year, and you guys have some very remarkable people, and it's been a great privilege to get to meet you guys and work with you. So thank you so much. You guys all have a great day. God bless you. And if you haven't had a chance to go check out the display downstairs along with these other fantastic displays upstairs, for all of you that are watching, you know, make sure and plan a car trip to town here to the premier historical center in Billings, Montana, and we appreciate it. Thank you all so much.